Every day, thousands of Comcast engineers and technologists, like Kunle, put people at the heart of everything they create.
In the average household, there are dozens of connected devices. Here in the Comcast family, we're building an integrated in-home Wi-Fi solution for millions of families like my own. It brings people together in meaningful ways.
Kunle and his team are building a Wi-Fi experience that connects 1 billion devices every year. Learn more about how Comcast is redefining the future of connectivity at comcastcorporation.com/Wi-Fi.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Hello, Beat Check listeners. I'm Shane Dixon Kavanaugh, Portland City Hall reporter with the Oregonian OregonLive, and your host today. First-class airfare to Hawaii, 5-star hotel stays, lots and lots of food. All of it footed, directly or indirectly, by customers of a large Portland area utility. A recent Oregonian OregonLive investigation found that executives with Clean Water Services, Washington County's sewer agency, have spent years enjoying fancy business trips to Hawaii and meals on ratepayers' dime. None of the lavish travel spending is accounted for in the agency's annual budgets, and, despite months of probing questions and public records requests, officials have not yet disclosed the total cost of 4 Hawaiian trips or provided the receipts on hundreds of thousands of dollars in food spending. Joining me today is Jamie Goldberg, whose rigorous watchdog reporting led to this month's series on clean water services, which I hope you will read. Jamie, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me on.
So this feels slightly weird to me, only because, Jamie, you're my editor.
I am.
And which is awesome, by the way. I think we have a really great working relationship, and I always appreciate and enjoy the work that you do to make my work better. But I bring this up in part only because probably a number of our listeners and Oregonian readers will recognize your name from many years ago in a different lifetime for you, that you spent years as our Portland Timbers beat reporter on the sports desk. And I was just hoping, before we get into your outstanding investigative series here, if you could kind of just walk us through, how did you get from, covering MLS to becoming, a top politics editor, on our team?
Yeah, I've done a lot here at the Oregonian in the last almost 12 years now, which is kind of crazy. But I started as a Timbers reporter. I was there for about 6 or 7 years. And then I've just made a lot of moves at the Oregonian. I covered the Blazers briefly, and then the pandemic happened. And sort of that was the big switch for me. I moved over to helping cover COVID and just decided I really loved the news side of the room and wanted to stay over here and keep reporting. So I've been a business reporter. I was a breaking news editor. And then for the last, I think it's about 2 years now, I've been the co-politics and education editor here at the Oregonian. And I also love investigative journalism. So sort of as something I've been doing on the side, I've been working with our investigative editor, Brad Schmidt. And this was a story that we came across, and I just started reporting out.
So in other words, you have worn and continue to wear many hats in our newsroom. And despite the fact that you've moved from primarily being a reporter to being an editor, you just can't quit it when you've got a good story on your hands. Is that what I'm hearing from you?
Yeah, I think that's what you're hearing.
So I would love for you to just start with, and this is a question we get all the time when there's just a big, weird story like this that comes together after months and months of reporting. It always starts with, well, how the heck did you even get onto this thing? Like, just take us back to the beginning. Like, how did this story start for you?
Yeah, these stories have taken a really long time, actually. I began reporting on this story last June after we received a tip that we might want to start looking into spending at Clean Water Services. So it's been 9 months. And, from there, we just started filing public records requests, waiting for responses. And I think we'll get into this a bit more, but in many cases, we were having to work around a lot of roadblocks with trying to get the records we needed. So it was just a reporting effort that started, and we just got a little bit further every month on it until we were able to publish.
And for our listeners, just Clean Water Services. I mean, folks in Washington County in particular probably know what that is, but tell us about. I mean, this is a public agency, public utility, but tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, it's Washington County's public sewer agency, and that's something I think is really important to remember. It functions as an independent special district, but it is a public agency. It is funded by ratepayers. It supports about 600,000 people in Washington County, and its board, the Washington County Board of Commissioners serves separately also as the Clean Water Services Board.
So what exactly is an independent special district, Jamie? That sounds a little odd.
It's essentially a public agency that, in this case, you have a public utility that has essentially a monopoly. Ratepayers have to pay their sewer bill. So it is a public agency. It works with the county, but its structure is separate from the county. It's not a county department. It has its own CEO, and it essentially operates as an independent agency.
So it's a public body. It's a government agency. It's in Washington County, but it's technically separate from the rest of Washington County government.
Yep.
And so what does that mean for issues like oversight, for example? Who watches over the sewer agency, Clean Water Services in Washington County?
Yeah, I think that's something that we're continuing to try to report out. Like I said before, the Clean Water Services Board is the members of the Washington County Board of Commissioners. So while the Washington County Board of Commissioners technically kind of have separate hats, they're the county board and then they're the Clean Water Service Board. It's the same members, and they have the role of oversight for clean water services. There's also a community Clean Water Services Advisory Commission that plays a role in providing oversight. And then, like any public agency, the Oregon Government Ethics Commission has the ability to look into any agency if there's any questions about ethical violations that possibly go against Oregon ethics laws. So they also provide a level of oversight as well. However, what oversight the agency does not have is the county auditor, and we looked into this week, of Washington County, let us know that she has been wanting to audit this agency for years. However, she's been informed by county council that she doesn't have the authority to do so under the county charter. And that's because, as we went into earlier, Clean Water Services is an independent special district. So there's not really that independent audit function there to provide the sort of audit you'd want that would dive into performance and operations and would be able to get at these things. The auditor said she's wanted to look at travel at Clean Water Services for years and just hasn't been allowed to.
Yeah. So in terms of these things, I mean, going back 9-10 months, when you first got a tip about Clean Water Services, I mean, what were you hearing, and and what launched you on sort of this spree of public records requests and questions that stretched on for months and months and months and months?
Yeah, I mean, I think we got a tip that sort of led us to want to look at the trips to Hawaii the salaries of the Clean Water Service CO, her salary, and also the food spending. So that was sort of outlined in a tip that we got. And so those were sort of the records requests we made and sort of launched us on this. I mean, to get into what we found, what we ultimately found after doing that reporting was that Clean Water Service executives have taken annual business trips to Hawaii for nearly a decade, and ratepayers have indirectly footed that bill. And that's for officials to stay in 5-star resorts and in some instances receive first-class airfare, premium rooms, and fine dining. And actually the 2023 trip alone indirectly cost ratepayers $42,000. And on top of that, going to the food side, we found that the agency's tab for local and travel meals was about $440,000 over 5 years. And I think it's important to note that that included 2 years where there was very little food spending because of the pandemic. And that amount of money during those 5 years, the agency spent 4 times as much as Portland and Clackamas County sewer agencies spent on food combined.
That sounds like some good eats.
Mm-hmm.
But so we have these executives at the Washington County's sewer agency going to Hawaii, you know, sometimes flying first class, staying in premium hotels. But why are they going to Hawaii every year? Why that destination specifically, or or a stated reason for those trips?
Yeah, this is where the story sort of got complicated. In 2016, Clean Water Services formed a captive insurance company, which is essentially a form of self-insurance. They thought this would be a more financially effective way for them to access things like earthquake insurance. They formed that captive insurance company in the state of Hawaii because they felt the business climate was most favorable in that state. And I think this is an important point. That captive insurance company is a wholly owned subsidiary of Clean Water Services, and it receives most of its revenue from premiums paid by the agency. As part of having this captive insurance company, the Clean Water Insurance Company needs to hold one board meeting in Hawaii every year. The requirement is that they have one board member present in the state for that meeting. The rest can be virtual. However, the insurance company has instead decided to send between 4 and 6 board members every year. And these board members are executives at Clean Water Services, or also Washington County Commissioner Roy Rogers is on that board. So executives of Clean Water Services are going every year to Hawaii for the annual board meeting they must hold. And they do it to coincide with the Hawaii Captive Insurance Council Forum. So a conference on captive insurance that takes place in Hawaii. So that's sort of how these trips happen.
Right. So just to recap here, the Washington County Sewer Agency, Clean Water Services, created its own insurance company, a separate entity, but a wholly owned subsidiary of the agency. And that they created this company, or basically, filed the paperwork to form this company or business in Hawaii specifically. Now, you said that Hawaii has an outstanding business climate for a captive, this type of insurance company that you said was a captive insurance company. Does Oregon not have a good business climate for such an entity, or what about another state that is within the contiguous 48 states?
There are a number of states within the U.S. that have strong captive insurance markets. I will say that Oregon has a very small captive insurance market, so there's only a couple businesses who have captive insurance company here in Oregon. Hawaii certainly is a state that has a much larger captive insurance market. But I think generally there is a feeling, and we see it even in Oregon on the state website that advertises captive insurance, of states wanting to play up the benefits you get from the state. Oregon plays up the mountains and the outdoor activities you have here, and Hawaii similarly plays up everything you get in Hawaii. So there is usually a requirement you have to have a board meeting in the state. So along with the favorable business regulations, I think states do see it as a benefit to try to convince prospective companies why they might want to come to that state every year.
Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to drop a name here, Diane Taniguchi Dennis, who is the CEO, the top executive at Clean Water Services at this sewer agency in Washington County. You also mentioned, and it comes up in your reporting, that Taniguchi Dennis grew up in Hawaii.
Yeah, she did. We don't exactly know what involvement she had in forming the captive insurance company. And we know that she praised the efforts at the time. However, exactly how the discussions went on behind the scenes to form the insurance company and how it ended up in Hawaii is not something we are entirely privy to.
And you spent a bit of time in your investigation reporting, piecing together, or at least trying to piece together, sort of Taniguchi Dennis, who is, technically a public employee in the state of Oregon, her overall compensation package, both as the CEO of Clean Water Services, but also the work that she does for their insurance company and, some other bits and pieces here. What did you find exactly, and what were you not able to learn?
Yeah, we spent a long time trying to figure out if she was making any money related to her work on the insurance company. We asked the agency about that in several different ways, and we were asking if the insurance company was paying Taniguchi Dennis any sort of compensation or things like that. And the agency, said that they were not, but it did turn out when we finally found an amendment to her contract from 2021 that Clean Water Services itself added a $60,000 a year addition to Taniguchi Dennis's contract for her work on the insurance company. So she was making $60,000 more from the formation of this. Her newest contract from March no longer includes that provision. We have asked the agency if that means it's just been sort of looped into her base salary or if she's no longer earning that stipend. But they have not responded to any of our requests with trying to get more information about her latest contract. So we don't really know. What we do know on her latest contract is that she makes a base salary now of $357,000. On top of that, the agency also pays an additional 15% of her salary into a retirement fund. And she also retired from the agency a couple years ago and was rehired. And because of that, on top of the other money I just mentioned, she earns an annual benefit of about $147,000 from the Oregon Public Employees Retirement System.
Or PERS.
Yes.
Got it. But so in one of the years that you looked at, Taniguchi Dennis, just on compensation alone between her CEO role and duties on the board of the insurance company, without and not counting, her public employee retirement pension, just the salary for that year cleared $400,000. Is that correct?
It was just under $400,000.
Gotcha.
And we don't have an entire breakdown of what that looks like because that was just the number the agency gave us. But yes, they said her total salary at the beginning of 2024 was about $400,000.
And, as somebody who covers Portland city government and has paid attention to the Bureau of Environmental Services, which is our fancy way of basically Portland's sewer agency. I mean, I think the director for that agency last year made something in the ballpark of about $225 or $250,000. So, it appears that Washington County's sewer head is making almost twice as much as the agency head in Portland.
Yeah, and as well as the agency head in Clackamas County at their sewer agency as well. Both in Portland and Clackamas County, their heads made and I'd have to look up the exact numbers, but it was in the $200,000 range.
I mean, and this comes through quite clearly in all of your reporting. And once again, listeners, I will make sure to include links to all of Jamie's stories in the show notes, and I strongly encourage you to read the reporting yourself. But you mentioned early on that you started working on this project back in June. And again, it's sort of mentioned time and time again throughout your reporting that your findings are based on what are ostensibly public records and accounting from the agency, something that, any Oregon resident or any member of the public should be able to get. Journalists often do this kind of work through public records requests. And yet you still do not have an entirely clear picture around, the CEO's compensation, around the expenses paid to on some of these trips to Hawaii, and even getting, sort of detailed accounting on the hundreds of thousands of dollars that have been spent on food and meals at the agency over the last few years. So what's going on here? Well, how are the records so incomplete given the amount of time that you've spent trying to get these materials?
Yeah, there is still a lot we don't know. In terms of the Hawaiian travel, this story was complicated by the fact that the agency had created that captive insurance company that we talked about. Because that captive insurance company, as I said earlier, is based in Hawaii, not Oregon. And so during the process of reporting the story, Clean Water Services kept directing us to the insurance company for any questions regarding the trips to Hawaii, because the insurance company paid for those, even though it was executives from Clean Water Services going on those trips. The insurance company, since they were in Hawaii, told us they didn't believe they were subject to Oregon public records law. So this was really a back and forth sort of fight with them about that throughout the reporting. They did ultimately agree to give us receipts for 3 years of travel expenses to Hawaii that we were initially asking about. Those receipts, however, left out specifically the receipt for the Diane Taniguchi Dennis's hotel room, and also the receipt for Washington County Commissioner Roy Rogers' hotel room. And the reason we were asking about both of those receipts is because both of those people stayed in premium rooms at the Fairmont Orchard in Hawaii for the 2023 conference. And Diane Taniguchi Dennis's hotel room cost about $7,000, and Roy Rogers cost about $5,300. So we really wanted to review those receipts. They would not give them to us, despite our repeated requests. We then learned that they had sent board members to this conference also in 2016, 2017, and 2018, and that they, as we were reporting this, they went again in 2024. So we started asking about those years as well. And again, they did not provide us any details, would not provide us any details about the spending on those trips or who went on those 4 trips. So we have no details of what occurred in those 4 years.
Okay.
So that was sort of on the Hawaii side. On the food spending, well, we went to the agency and asked for the top line spending on food, and that's reported in the story. But then we saw that the office of the CEO and one other department had spent significantly more on food than other departments. So we asked for expense reports related to that food spending. But we're told that was kept not digitally, but in a bunch of boxes on paper forms. And that if we wanted to see some of those expense reports, it would cost at least about $3,800 for the agency to provide it.
The Oregonian would have to pay $3,800 to get the public records.
Yeah, and that from what they indicated, that would have been only some of the public records, although we don't know what the total amount would have cost for all of them. So we were able to negotiate with them to give us some top line information and provide some specific receipts, but we were never really able to look at a full breakdown because that amount of money was just not an amount that was feasible to spend.
You covered quite a lot of ground here in this investigative series, but is there anything in particular that surprised you most in the reporting process, or something that, in terms of your findings that really stood out, or just in terms of, you've done this kind of work before, and this seems like it was a uniquely sort of challenging set of circumstances. So I'm just curious, what stood out most for you, just overall?
Yeah, I think how challenging it was to get at some of these records definitely stood out for me. But since we've talked about that a bit, I will sort of get into something else that surprised me, which was just the way in which this public agency seems to be operating like a public company. For example, if you look at our story we did on food spending, maybe some people may not think that an individual lunch at Din Tai Fung for 3 agency executives that cost $225 is that shocking. You see that maybe in private companies all the time, of folks going out to lunches. But this is a public agency, and public agencies are held to very high standards because they are funded by the public. And so if you look, for example, at state employees in Oregon, they aren't allowed to charge the state at all in most cases for meals where all the attendees work for the state. And even public agencies that do allow reimbursements for meals, usually they use the federal reimbursement rate as the standard, which for a Portland area lunch, for example, would come out to no more than $23 a person. And so what was really striking was just how often Diane Taniguchi-Dennis and her top deputies were charging ratepayers for lunches that maybe would go above what would be the federal reimbursement rate, but just that they were happening often, that you would see these lunches with executives going out together that, like I said, would not be allowed by other governments, would not necessarily allow this kind of spending at all. And so I just think there is, and we get into it in our most recent story, that Clean Water Services has become more and more independent from the county over the years. And there was just signs in this reporting that makes it feel like they do operate in many ways like an independent company. But I think what's important is that this is a public agency. This is ratepayer money. And so that's why ultimately we wanted to keep digging into this.
And so far, what has been the reaction or response that you've received on this series, whether it's from Washington County officials, ratepayers of Clean Water Services? You mentioned early on that you've talked with Washington County's auditor about the agency. Yeah, just give us just sort of a quick overview of what the response has been so far.
Yeah, I've heard from, I think I've received probably more than 100 emails. I've seen the responses on social media. There's been a massive outpouring of response, particularly a lot of it is from Oregon residents, but a lot of it is also from Washington County ratepayers. And many people have raised concerns with me in light of this reporting. We spoke to the Washington County auditor, and as she said, she doesn't have the right under the county charter as of now to audit Clean Water Services, but she's planning on bringing a list of charter amendments to the County Board of Commissioners to try to get them to make amendments to the charter. That process would require voter approval, and I don't know where it will go, but she is hopeful that they will look at making changes that would involve, as part of that, allowing her to audit clean water services. The one group I have not heard from at this point is the Washington County Board of Commissioners. They have not commented on this story. I reached out to all of them because, as I said, they serve as the Clean Water Board of Commissioners. But at this point, they haven't said anything. And Clean Water Services itself, I believe, has defended the spending internally and said in emails to employees that they are going to do what they can to restore public trust as well. But publicly, they haven't commented to me since the articles came out.
And Jamie, do you think you're going to be doing any additional follow-up stories? Are there more pieces coming out? Like, after doing all of this work, which again for listeners started in June, where does a story like this go from here after you've done most of the reporting?
Yeah, I mean, I think that sometimes you write a story and then you just move on to the next, and that, you kind of leave something hanging without there being any impact from it. We do, in this case, we do want to continue to follow whatever leads we have or any tips that we get. And so I think I've already filed yesterday morning a number of public records requests to the agency, and we'll probably be filing several more. I don't know what comes next, but we certainly are going to continue to look into spending practices at the agency and anything that comes from this reporting.
Thanks so much for listening to Beat Check with the Oregonian. If you like this show, give us a 5-star rating and review in Apple Podcasts. It really helps people find the show. And tell a friend. Help spread the word. The best way to support our journalism and stories like this one is with a subscription to the Oregonian OregonLive. You can do that at OregonLive.com/pod support. Until next time,